signed copy, and I love it.
Well, thank you so much. And you have look. First, I need to congratulate you on your podcast. It's amazing, like what can
Oh,
happen in 4 years. You know what I'm saying? Like you weren't doing a podcast 4 years ago.
no, I was very anti-podcast. I did not want to do a podcast. I was like, I had this thing in my brain where I was like, I'm a writer, and that's what I'm going to do. I didn't
Right.
want to. I was a because when you write, you know this. You're an author. When you
Hmm.
write, it's a solo. It's very personal.
Yes.
It's just you and your computer. And
Yes.
but when you do something like this, you know, you're putting it out there. Like when you write a book, eventually people are going to read it and
Uh
they're
huh.
going to either like it or hate it. But when you do a podcast, you record it and then it comes right out, and then people can either hate it or love it. So I was afraid of that. So I had to grow as a person
Right.
before I could do it. But thank you. You're on a podcast too. What is your show called?
Yeah, it's called So Much
So
to
much
Say.
to say.
Yeah, it's called So Much to Say.
How long
So,
have you been doing that?
May 1st made, I want to say 4 years.
Oh
I think it's
wow.
I think it's been four
Good for
years.
you.
Yeah, I think it's been 4 years,
That's
Joe.
awesome.
But yeah, you and I met in
Hey, you
Washington
get
D.C. And I mean, I was drawn to you like as soon as we met. You know, I remember I thought your first book was so funny. Tell me the title again. I know it's about the flight attendant. I know it's the flight attendant, but I cannot. And I bought the book, but I just cannot. And I can see the cover in my head, but I cannot remember the title.
it's the first one when I was there. It was fasten your seatbelt and
That
eat your fucking nuts.
Yes, that's it. Fasten your seatbelts and eat your fucking nuts. And I remember you reading excerpts from it, and I just thought it was so funny. I really did.
What I remember from that day,
Yeah.
because I'm so awful, is I just remember you reading these personal, so important stories of your life. Rashad reading about like how music impacted his growing up, and then me
Yes.
just throwing out dick jokes, me telling dick jokes, and
But it was a
being
great balance.
inappropriate.
But that was a great balance.
But
It was a great balance, and that's what art does. That's what books do. You know what I mean? It allows people to escape through to different, different fantasies, if you will, different stories, different worlds. That's the beauty.
oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
You mentioned something that I was going to talk to later on, but I just want to hint on it now so I don't forget. You said something about you were drawn to me, and in your new book, which is titled, I'm sorry, I'm a mess. I'm so nervous talking to you like I've never
Don't
met
be
you before.
nervous. Don't be nervous.
In your new book, Book of Jewels for Personal Development, you
Mhm.
talk about how people were drawn to your aura, or they just saw you. You share a story about you were working as a host in a restaurant. A woman called you over and she was like, "What do you do?" And you're like, "I work here." No, no. What do you do?
Right.
And that is how I felt when I met you. When I sat next to you on that stage, I felt this man is important. His
Wow.
What he has to say is important. Now I'm jumping ahead to the book, but
Hmm.
I want to rewind a little bit, and I want to know if we can talk about the current events and what's happening in the United States right now.
Absolutely. And interestingly enough, like you were saying a moment ago, you were resistant to doing a podcast because you had it set in your mind that you were a writer, you were going to write books, and that was what you wanted to do. But underneath that, there was that fear of being so exposed and getting that immediate feedback that could potentially be negative feedback, if you did the podcast. Well, the same was true for me. So at that point, I was writing books. I'd written my first book and, soon after was going to write the sequel. But I was very much so reticent to be so visible on social media. Again, in the way that you said you were resisting doing a podcast. I didn't want to be visible. I didn't care if people knew what I looked like, if people knew who I was, or if people recognized me in the street. I never wanted that. But then what I realized was I had to have a very honest conversation with myself, and I realized that God will dream a bigger dream for you than you will ever dream for yourself. And I believe that a part of the reason that quote unquote success, whatever that means and whatever that looks like for you, for me, it was stagnant, if you will, because I was resisting. I was resisting the bigger dream, the bigger picture that God had for me. Because I was like, well, no, I don't want to do that. I just want to do this. But I started doing more in front of the camera. I started to use my social media in a way that I wasn't using it before. Before, I would post pictures and from book signings and pictures of books and that kind of thing. And my social media started to plateau. Like the following wasn't increasing. I was getting the same amount of likes and comments on my posts, whether it was on Facebook or Instagram. And it wasn't until I started working with the Queen's Supreme Court show, which is an online show hosted by T.S. Madison, that I had invited her on my podcast, so much to say. And that particular day, she said to me, well, I understand that you wrote these books. Because at that point, I had 3 books by the time I met her. And she said, well, I understand that you have these books. She said, but you're not going to really sell these books until you get in front of the camera. She said, because people have to like you. She said, and you have the personality. She said, you have to get in front of the camera. So I say all of that to say, in a very long way, to come back to answer your question about what's going on now. I've now I've started an extension of So Much to Say podcast. And that extension is my YouTube channel, where, so the opening for my podcast is Good Day Thinkers, Thought Leaders, Progressives, and Dreamers. I'm Craig the Writer Stewart, and this is So Much to Say. These are my thoughts in my voice on black shit, white shit, gay shit, and everything in between. And then I go right into whatever the conversation is. Well, I've just started streaming on YouTube probably about a year ago. I was already streaming on Facebook, but I started streaming on YouTube and Facebook simultaneously about a year ago. And just recently, and when I say recently, I mean about the past week or week and a half, I started an extension on my YouTube channel called So Much to Say YouTube TV. So it's still like my podcast, but it's just like these quick-witted things and thoughts and ideas that I have about what's going on in the world. It may not be political as the riots and the petitioning and stuff that's going protesting that's happening. It could be something like, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar, but Lil Boosie. He's a rapper, and he's talking about, just a couple weeks ago, he was talking about how he had his 14-year-old son's dick sucked by a grown woman. And I just wanted to speak about how I wanted to talk about how dysfunctional that was. That's really dysfunctional. Yeah, like it's very dysfunctional.
How old?
His son, he said his son was 12 or 13 at the time, and not only did he have his son's dick sucked by a grown woman, but also his nephew. His underage nephew. And so I wanted to speak about that. So on my YouTube channel, again, there's a section called So Much to Say YouTube TV. And I open with Good Day Thinkers, Thought Leaders, and I talk about that. So I just recently started talking about the state of what's happening in this country. And there's a video over there where I talk about the riots and the protesting. But I also talked about there was a white woman in New York called Amy. Her name is Amy Cooper, and she approached.
Oh, I know that bitch.
Yeah, that story. She was upset because the guy, the black guy asked her if she could put her dog on a leash, and she, so
That's all he did.
yeah, and so and I talked about the whole George Floyd thing, the guy who was just killed in Minnesota. So I've been. Not only do I talk about what I try to do. Just like I do on So Much to Say podcast, I try to talk about things that are socially relevant. Like, I'm not going to use my YouTube or my Facebook to get on there talking about what's happening on the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills or Atlanta or any other show, because that's not that important to me. But if I can put my quick wit and humor to a serious subject matter, whether it's the George Floyd thing or the Little Boosie thing that I was just telling you about, I want to be able to do that because I want to challenge what people think. And that's what I try to do in everything that I create, even with the books. I want to challenge people to see the world or life or situations different from what they would have seen it. I want to expand the way that they think. I want to stretch the way that they think. And I've been very clear for a long time that what I was called to do, because I'm a very spiritual person, not religious, very spiritual. I believe that I was called to bridge communities. I believe that what I was called to do, through my work, and now through my personality, because I have to start to think that way, because I'm so used to just being behind the camera, you know what I'm saying? So I'm learning that what I was called to do was bridge communities through my personality and through the art that I create, whether it's the podcast, whether it's my books, whether it's my greeting card business, because I have a greeting card business, and each card is written in such a way that any card could be given to male or female, because the card is really about the emotion. So there isn't a card that's going to be like, oh, girl, or when you love a woman, da, da, da. It's not that. It's all about the feeling. It's all about the situation. So that's what I try to do with Say It in a Card. I try to do that with every single thing that I do. And it's about bridging communities, whether it's black and white people, whether it's gay and trans people, black gay people and gay white people, black people, heterosexual people and black gay people. It's about bridging communities. And I just think that that's what one of my biggest life goals and what I was called to do.
And I think, when I read your books, I read two of your books,
Mm-hmm.
and I know you from social media. I've heard you speak. I watch your videos, and that is exactly what I believe that you are meant to do.
Mm-hmm.
One thing, so I did a little of my homework. I'm going way off script now. I did a little of my homework, and I watched 13th, because in your new book...
Oh, you did?
You reckon... I told you I do my homework. I had to do my homework. I was like, I cannot have Craig Stewart on my show and come off like, what?
Yeah.
So, right in the dedication, you recommend to watch this documentary on Netflix, which is called 13th. I have it written down here somewhere. 13th. Where is it? Oh,
I believe it's called 13th From Slave to
Criminal with One Amendment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I watched it. Of course, I was very upset about it. I had to go for a walk.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went for the walk, I was thinking, like, I have to make sure I tell Craig never to stop writing. Never to stop doing what he's doing.
Thank
because
you.
Your voice is something we need you. We definitely need you specifically, doing what you're doing. And I feel honored to know you, because I know the message that you're delivering. Like when you said, I'm not talking about the Real Housewives of Atlanta. I'm talking about some rapper who's letting his 12-year-old boy get his dick sucked by a woman. Because that's just as wrong as letting your 12-year-old daughter screw some adult man.
Right. It's like, how is what he did any
no
different?
sense.
Right. It's like, how is what he did any different from what R. Kelly was doing? Or what he
was pissing on the kid.
Right. Right. That's the nuance. Or Woody Allen for that matter. You know what I mean? So we wouldn't allow an underage girl to be having sex with a grown man. So why would you think that it's okay? Because underneath all of that, this is really a conversation about his fear that his son or his nephews would be gay, which is a whole nother conversation. But Joe, I really
An episode, yeah.
that's a whole different one, yeah. But I really appreciate that you, as a white man, could find the value in what I wrote in Book of Jewels, because the dedication, it says dedicated to black people. Now that doesn't mean that I only want black people to read it, not at all. But I wanted to really make something in particular for us. Again, anything that I write, just like with Words Never Spoken, when I sat down to write Words Never Spoken, I sat down with intentions to write that book to and for black gay men. Now, that doesn't mean I didn't want women to read it. Now, Joe, to this date, more women have bought that book than gay men. But when I sat down, it was my intention to, but it doesn't mean that I was excluding women in the same way that I'm saying with Book of Jewels. I'm not saying that white people shouldn't read it, Hispanic people shouldn't read it. I'm just saying when I sat down to write this book, I wanted to speak directly to black people. Because, and it was important for me to say that in that dedication, because I don't know if you know this or if many people outside of the black community are aware of this, but in the black community, it is a well-known fact that if you are an entrepreneur, if you are an artist, that oftentimes there's this conversation of, well, you want to be inclusive. You want to make sure that white people feel included. You know, just like in the whole movie industry, there's this idea of white hope. Like these movies that have this theme of white hope. Like what was the movie with Sandra Bullock and she had the little black boy who played football and she took him into her house.
Oh,
The Blind Side.
Or...
Right, The Blind Side.
Okay, yeah.
So movies like that where the white person, the white character is like the savior. The white person comes through. That's the what's called the white hope. And there's a theme, that's a real thing that happens in a lot of these Hollywood movies where there's this white savior that comes through and saves the day and makes everything better and just da-da-da-da. And I remember reading an article and it was saying in the article that the reason that that's done is because, even like with the movie with Taraji P. Henson and Janelle Monáe and Octavia Spencer where they were the mathematicians. That movie was called Hidden Figures. Hidden Figures. Even in that movie, like the woman that Katherine Johnson that Taraji played, she was, I don't know if she's still living now, but I believe she may be. But she was living when they did that film, and she said that the way that certain things happened in that movie did not happen in real life. So, for example, if you saw the movie, there was a point in the movie where she had created the math for them to figure out how to launch that space shuttle out into space. And so there's a point in the movie where Kevin Costner invites her in because her office was separate because this was during segregation. So her office was separate. She had separate restrooms, but he invited her in to see the launch. And she said in an interview that never happened. She still had to watch it from her desk. They didn't even invite her in. And there was this idea of this white hope, this good white person that existed in the movie. And this article that I read said that the reason that Hollywood does that is so that white people living today don't feel that there weren't some good white people at some point. Or white people today the good ones, quote unquote, can see themselves and say, oh, I would have been that kind of white person. And so for me, I wanted to write this book and specifically say, this is for you. This is for black people. Because, I've been challenged as an artist. I've written a stage play before and I've had people tell me, oh, well, you need to diversify it so that, because white people need to be able to come to this play. Or, white people need to be able to read this book. And it wasn't until, I did a lot of research on Toni Morrison when I was writing my first book. And I remember seeing an interview where she said she was interviewing with Charlie, is it Charlie Rose? And she's...
Oh, yeah, the one who Me Too'd?
Yes, yes. And she said to him, she said, I write for black people. She said it so matter of fact, without an apology. And again, it's not just about artists, because even black-owned restaurants sometimes feel like they have to go out of their way to cater to white folks, to the white customer. And you'll sometimes see it. And again, I don't know if you've ever paid attention to this, if you've ever noticed it, but I have noticed it as a black person that sometimes I have gotten even subpar service from a black-owned business owner right in my face, and then they turn right around and look to the white customer and say, hi, how are you? Oh my God, yeah, come on in. They're so friendly. They roll out this 5-star carpet, this 5-star customer service, because somewhere in their mind they were taught and programmed to believe that you have to, the only way that you're going to succeed is if you earn the white dollar. Because obviously the idea is the black community is not enough to sustain your business.
Well, you mentioned in your book, you mentioned the word white gaze. Is that kind of what this is? I've never heard that term before. Is it kind of like the idea of, as a black man or a black woman, it's like there's something in the brain that says I need to be I need the approval from white people, or I care about what white people think of me. Where does that come from?
I first heard the term white gaze from Toni Morrison. And in one of the clips that I saw, she said, I'm no longer... And in fact, I pulled that clip from Charlie Rose and I put it in my promo video for Book of Jewels, when I launched the book. And I have a clip of her saying it. And she says, I'm no longer concerned with the white gaze. Because again, oftentimes as artists, we're taught that you have to be concerned with how white people are going to see it. That's what I mean by white gaze. You have to be concerned with how are they going to see it through their lens, through their life experiences. But Toni Morrison really empowered me to be able to speak flat-footed, unapologetically and say, listen, just because I'm for black people doesn't mean I'm against white people. It's not that at all. But I just feel like if I'm not going to, if black artists, and I'm a black artist, if black artists aren't going to tell our stories without concern with what white people think, then our stories will never be told. Because we already know that our stories aren't really told through Hollywood. And when they aren't totally told correctly and accurately. So if we're not going to do it, then who the hell is going to do it? You know what I mean? So, and I couldn't allow myself to be afraid to speak so boldly in Book of Jewels because a fear that, well, maybe it will affect your book sales. You know what I'm saying? I couldn't worry about that. You know what I'm saying? I couldn't.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I had to really tell. And here's what I learned, Joe. White folks who really understand exactly what I'm saying and really understand the climate of what's happening now and previously in this country aren't offended by what I said. They're not. Because they're as frustrated with the shit as we are. You understand what I'm saying? And so I literally just had this conversation last night with a good friend of mine, and I was saying to him that I think sometimes we ascribe, when I say we, I'm talking about black folks or marginalized communities, period. I think sometimes when we ascribe certain things to racism because there's so much of it that it's hard for us to kind of figure out if it's racist or if it was just bad customer service or if it was just a bad experience. You know what I'm saying? And it's hard to figure out, for lack of a better word, who the good white people are. And even like when I moved, and even like when I moved through my day, as I was saying to my friend yesterday, I've even noticed in the past few days since George Floyd was killed that I have come in contact with white folks that have smiled a little more or have tried to be even more friendly in a subliminal way, I think, of letting me know I'm not with the shit. I'm not with all of this foolishness. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's almost like they're trying to, in a non-verbal kind of way, let me know that the state of this world or this country right now is not okay.
And how does that does that make you feel good? Is that a good thing? Because I'm not gonna lie, I actually do that. Like, if I'm somewhere, I'm actually extra nice to my black fellow citizens because I feel like there's so much hate and so much ignorance from so many white people in the world that I have to connect with you and I have to let you know I'm not down with all that stupid shit.
Right.
So, and sometimes I question myself because, as a white person, I understand my privilege and I understand that I'm very lucky to have the opportunities that I've had. And on a past episode, I had a friend on named Keisha, and we talked about race and racism, and we shared a story about how we were both in the wrong. We were both pulled over by cops. I got off. I was sent away home. She went to jail. So I'm so aware of it, but does it matter if if I see a black woman or a black man and I smile more and I just want to connect that to listen, like you said earlier, listen, if I lived in that time, I think they mentioned this in the 13th movie, a lot of white people watch what happened. They watch that movie, they watch history, they see history. If I was back there then, I wouldn't have let that happen. And I always say that. And then when I watched this movie, I was like, how do I know I would have said that? Because
exactly.
People were so dumb and ignorant and brainwashed. And that 400 years, white people have been programmed to be afraid of black people.
Right. And I really think
and
I really think that that's at the base of all that's happening. I said that on my YouTube channel the other day. Like, I really do think that, because we've known since probably I was in high school, and I'm 44 now, but I remember them projecting back then that the majority would be Hispanic people, and then followed by brown and black people. You know what I mean? So we knew that, like, by the year 2020, whatever it was. You know what I mean? I remember them talking about that, forecasting, and I really do understand. I really believe that at the base of all of this racism, even when Trump was first talking about getting Mexicans out of the country, that's really what it was about. It was really trying to control the numbers. And when you see all of these black folks, unarmed black folks getting shot and killed mysteriously on video, sometimes not on video, like Sandra Bland, it's no accident. I really do feel like it's a way to try to exterminate and control the numbers. And I know
let's
some.
Go back. Let's go.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, no, I wanted to talk about. You mentioned earlier Amy Cooper, and I really wanted to talk about that before we talk about the police in general. You know, because people say, "Oh, there's good cops." Yes, there's good cops.
Absolutely.
It's really not the individual people; it's the system.
It's the system
that needs to be torn down and rebuilt. And it goes back to the Reconstruction after the Civil War up until World War II, where once the slaves were free. And please, you're going to know this more than I am. So if I have any facts that are wrong, please correct me, right? Because I'm not into the fake news, and if I'm wrong, I'll say it.
Right.
But during that time, it was all those white people, white politicians, who were actually telling white citizens, like, we have to be careful because now that the black people are free, they're going to try to take over. They're going to do to us what we did to them, and we can't have that.
Absolutely.
So we need to we need to hold them in place. And I honestly believe a lot of uneducated, I hate to say it like that, where a lot of white people don't even realize that because, oh, I'm not black, why should I worry? But you should worry because they're all fucking Americans. Oh, see, I should have warned you. I get very emotional.
No. And
I get really riled up. So I don't mean to, I'm not yelling at you.
No, but that's a good thing. That's passion. And and here's what I will tell you, just to echo what you just said. Oftentimes, and I've never been in a conversation like this, but I have a friend who works in the fashion industry, and they all went out to dinner one night, and this was right when Trump first got into office, and it was he was the only black person there, and it was mostly I think it was mostly white women, but there were some white guys there as well, and they were all just talking about how they voted for him, and because of the tax benefits, and he was so passionate, but he really couldn't express himself the way that he wanted to, because they were saying how they voted in their interest, and his concern was, well, you weren't concerned that he was talking about just pulling people, ripping people out of this country, and just all of the things that he was talking about. And some of what they said at that dinner table, that he relayed to me, was that oftentimes people just don't want to work for the things that they need. They were talking about how they worked for everything that they had, and this and just completely oblivious to their privilege. And here's what I will say. Are you familiar with Black Wall Street?
Was that in the South?
It was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And
yes, well, yes.
Yeah, so, white folks at one point were really pushing for segregation. Separate, separate schools, separate this, separate that. And so one of the reasons why I think, going back to what I was saying earlier, just to kind of connect that thread, part of the reason that I think there are some black people who think that they need white dollars or white support or white customers is because reaches back to segregation. Because if we can segregate, if we can desegregate, we can get the dollars from the white community and dollars from the black community, and we can be the successful business. But the truth of the matter is, and I'm not at all saying that we should be separate. The point that I'm illustrating is there was a time that we had no choice but to be separate. And out of that separation was Black Wall Street. You had black-owned businesses, grocery stores, laundromats, anything that you can think of. We were self-sufficient, self-contained. $1 million businesses. Many of them were $1 million businesses, and you can look this information up. It was burned to the ground by white supremacists. So on one hand, go ahead. I was just gonna say, on one hand, we keep starting at the same time. Okay, I was gonna say, on one hand, white folks, and I don't mean all white folks, but on one hand, you have white folks that say, well, they just need their own stuff. They need their own, we just need to be separate. Don't mix, don't marry, don't love. But then when we did that, it was burned down because they saw the potential, they saw the power, right? And so
Right.
for
And white people are afraid of that. White people,
right,
you know, today too. But 100 years ago, what I had read was, white people were seeing like, why the hell does this black man have a piano in his house and I don't? Shit,
right,
that's not America. That's not the way it should be.
right,
And that ignorant thought, and you would think 100 years later people wouldn't think like that, but somehow it's almost like, yeah, I shouldn't say it's coming back. It's been there. It hasn't gone anywhere. And when you hear white people say, "Where did this come from?" You want to smack them because you want to say,
it's
no,
always
it's
been
not
there.
new. This isn't new. They're not George Floyd is just another situation. Now it's on camera.
Right.
There's always been protesting. There's always been racism. Now it's getting caught on camera, and you're all getting caught.
And sadly, a lot of times white folks just aren't aware of their privilege. This was a conversation that I had just yesterday. And I'm a person that believes that it's intellectually lazy for a white person to live, exist, breathe in 2020 and just be so oblivious to the privileges and how the playing field is slanted and has always been slanted. But I feel that same way about black folks who still believe that it's wrong to be gay and believe that you just need to pray the gay away. I feel the same about both things. It's intellectually lazy. But what I will say is, even when we saw those Hollywood people that were, and I can't remember, Lori Loughlin and the woman who played in Transamerica, when they were cheating to get their kids in these Ivy League schools, they were paying. And when that whole thing happened, I'm going to tell you what I was thinking. I was thinking, like, you already have this privileged life. The world, the country already moves in your favor. It already bends in your favor. And then you still have to go and cheat to get your kid in an Ivy League school. And it's like, think about all of the black kids or the kids of color that don't even have the basic opportunity that you have. And then you still have to try to cheat the system. Like, to me, it's just like, but that kind of thing happens all the time. Because racism isn't just about how people treat you. It's about the things that they exclude you from, too.
Wow, I've never thought of it that way, but that's true. It's not just, that makes sense. When Felicity Huffman, when that situation happened, what you're talking about, my thought was, she went to jail for what, 10 days? 10 days. But that was and then it makes me think of the black mom who got like 5 years in jail for lying about an address so her kid could go to a different school.
Exactly.
That's where my brain goes. My brain goes, and I love how you called it lazy. Black, white, whoever.
Yeah.
Like, if you're not paying attention to what's going on, you're fucking lazy. Because how can you look at that and not say, oh, this person is privileged? Like, how the hell do you send a mom who's trying to get her kid into a better elementary school or middle school or whatnot, and you have this white rich woman who just spends who lied about, actually she lied about the SAT scores. They have false SAT scores. How as a black man do you wake up every morning and say, I'm going to get through today even though I know the world is against me?
And
I'm asking you, how do you do that?
Well, that's what
I don't have the strength. I wouldn't have the strength.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. Honestly, Joe, I can't say to you that I can feel that. Like, I don't feel that every day that I live, every day that I move. I know that racism exists. I know that it's there. I know systemic racism is there. I think that it rears its ugly head for me if I am stopped by a traffic stop or, by an officer and I have to go to court for a traffic stop. It's instances like that it pops up for me. I can't say to you that I feel it every single day. Now, I'm sure that there are people that feel it every single day, but I don't work for a corporate company, so I bypass it in that arena. You know what I'm saying? So I'm sure any person of color or black person that works in corporate America, they feel it every single day. Or depending on what your life consists of. See, my life doesn't consist of that, but I absolutely know that it's a real thing. I guess I can probably, if I pay closer attention to it, probably can notice it if I'm in a particular restaurant or a particular community, something like that. But other than that, I don't really let it consume me. I notice it in instances like this when the country is on fire, for sure.
You're a very strong person, and I think that makes sense to me, because if you allow it to consume you every day, if you woke up thinking that every single day, you would probably live a very miserable life. You'd probably just be so angry all the time. You couldn't even enjoy success. You couldn't enjoy your life, your children, because you would be consumed. And I kind of went through. I'm not gonna compare myself to a black person, but I kind of went through that with the whole equality marriage thing as a gay guy.
Yeah.
I would wake up angry. I was angry for weeks and weeks and weeks, and it became exhausting. And at some point, I was just like, all right, I'm gonna have to stand up for myself. I'm gonna have to talk about this. I'm gonna have to try to get uneducated straight people to understand why this is good. But after that, I have to kind of just see what happens. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And see, the thing is, you have to multiply that times 10, because that's what people of color.
That's why,
Because
that's why at the beginning of the sentence, I was like, I'm not comparing.
Right. No, I got you. And I think too, Joe. Go ahead. What's your goal in life?
I was gonna say, my goal in life, I know I'll never be able to. I can never say I understand what black people are going through. My goal in life is to understand why we are at where we're at today.
And
I want to know why this happened. And you have to study history. You have to watch these documentaries. You can't be lazy. Like you said, I fucking love that. You cannot be a lazy American or a lazy human being.
Intellectually lazy.
Be shocked, right? And then be shocked when the country's burning.
Right.
This has been setting up to happen for a long time. So don't be shocked. Don't be shocked.
And then I want to add to something that I said a moment ago in terms of like black folks that feel that pressure every single day. I'm sure depending on what community you live in as well. If you lived in an underserved community, you feel it. Policemen patrolling the neighborhood constantly. Helicopters patrolling the neighborhood constantly. Going into a grocery store with subpar lack of quality groceries. You know what I'm saying? So I'm sure, you would feel that every single day. So I don't want to minimize that at all.
Right. No, but everyone has their struggles.
Right.
And I think that's why, white people have such a hard. So this is my opinion. White people with white privilege, a lot of white people can't even accept it. And we are not going to move until we can accept that, the color of my skin makes life a little. The example I used with Keisha on my episode with her, I get pulled over. I'm 17 years old, do not have a driver's. I don't even have a driver's license.
Right.
And I'm like, I left it at home. He's like, okay, go. And then Keisha gets pulled over, and she's got a friend with her. Her license is suspended. To me, it's the same thing. We both don't have license, right, technically. And she's driving. She's with a friend of hers who's black. The cops start harassing him for his driver's license. He's not even driving. Long story short, she ends up getting arrested. And on the episode, we shared these situations, and I thought it was so important for those people out there who are like, no, there's no such thing as white privilege. No, there is. And you are denying everything that's happened to black people over the last 400 years, and it's getting old.
Right. And then the only way that we can have this conversation, too, about white privilege, or I should say, we can't have this conversation about white privilege without having the conversation about the head start that white folks have had over black folks. And I'm speaking in particular the current generation and several generations before that. Like when I watch HGTV and I see a young couple, 25, 27, and they've just gotten married, a white couple, and they've just gotten married and they're about to buy their first home. And they ask, well, how much are you going to put down on your first home? And they have $80,000, $100,000 that their grandfather or their grandmother put in a trust or that their parents gave them as graduation gifts from college. And like, black folks don't have that kind of privilege. We don't have that kind of luxury. And it's not because black folks haven't worked, because I just explained the whole Black Wall Street thing, but also because most of what we've created and curated was taken from us. I'll give you a very basic example. I used to watch Antique Roadshow, and I've talked about this on my live before. And there was a white woman that came in. She had a floor pot, one of those ceramic floor pots. And the appraiser said to her, do you have any idea what this pot is worth? And where did you get this? She said, oh, it's been passed down in my family for years. Older white woman. And there was a name scrawled at the bottom of the pot. It said Dave. And the appraiser said, oh, he was known as Dave the slave. And his slave owner used to commission him to create all kinds of pots, and then the slave owner would sell that stuff to, you know, the locals as income. So obviously this floor pot.
They're actually saying that they're saying this on the show.
Yes.
Oh my God! Go keep going.
So this pot had obviously been, you know, passed down generationally in her family. And here she comes with the pot, had no idea the history of the pot. She just knew it had been passed down to her family. The appraiser said to her, do you have any idea how much a pot like this? And they had a little crack in it. He said, but there aren't many of these in the world. He said there are a few of them in some museums around the world, maybe 3 or 4. Something like that, he said. The pot was worth upwards of 60 grand, okay? My point is, if Dave's family had gotten that pot, that would have been a step up for Dave's family. It's no different than the Jack Daniels story. Jack Daniels cognac. There was a slave who formulated that. But the family who owns it is the family that owned that slave. That black family isn't benefiting from that. So it's those things like that that have been taken from us. And my point is, generations of the family that were related to the Jack Daniels creator, some of those people were probably on public assistance, probably didn't have money for college. You know what I'm saying? But if that money was directed the way that it was supposed to be, I can give you another story, the Henrietta Lacks story. If you've never heard of the Henrietta Lacks story, it was a black woman from Baltimore, my hometown. And Johns Hopkins researched with her cells. To this day, every major medical breakthrough that science has discovered came from the use of this woman's cells. They never compensated her or her family. So it's just things like that that have been taken from us to handicap us, to cripple us. And that's why I say in the dedication of Book of Jewels, we've managed to create such a beautiful life for ourselves with the scraps that were left for us. And when I say the scraps, I don't just mean the scraps of resources and we've been able to send ourselves to college or start a business or own a home. I'm talking about even the scraps that were left for us in the slave quarters as food. Soul food originated from the scraps. The pieces of the pig that the white folks didn't want. The pieces of, you know what I'm saying? So we've always been able to do something with the scraps.
Well, you guys are survivors.
Yeah.
And you know, I want to talk about the pot for a minute. That story, I'm amazed that, you know, I wonder if this woman, like, said, all right, I'm going to sell this and I'm going to find this family and I'm going to give them this money.
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
That's what you should have done.
That woman probably, and I don't know this is just my mind as a writer going, and I've said this on my life. I said that lady probably took that money and put it in a trust for her grandchildren. So when somebody gets married, she got $25,000 for their marriage, or a down payment on their home, or a down payment for them to start a business, or for them to go to college. And I think about if my family was able to will money to me or leave money to me in that way. Or just think about the people of color, period. If we were that fortunate, the playing fields would be a lot more level.
You know, there's a book out right now on my Facebook page, my personal Facebook page.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote about a book called The Color of Law. Have you heard it?
No, I haven't.
Okay. I need to look up the author. Well, it's right here on my phone. But so The Color of Law, it's written by a professor, and it's about how the government segregated neighborhoods after World War II,
Mm-hmm.
and how you would come. And I don't think a lot. Again, I go back to I just don't think people know. That's why it's like, as white people, don't be lazy. Read and understand,
Mm-hmm.
so that when you see angry black people or angry white people or any angry person who's upset with how the people of color are treated for the last 400 years,
Mm-hmm.
you will understand. And so, you know, and correct me if I'm wrong, of course, but, you know, after World War II, the heroes come home, and, you know, the black folks and the white folks serving in the war, everybody's a hero. Everyone comes home a hero. The white guy, we'll call him Dan. Let's call him Dan.
Mm-hmm.
That's a white name. Dan goes to the bank. Dan's like, hey, I want to get a loan. I'm going to buy this house for my family. And
Mm-hmm.
the bank's like, you're a GI. Here you go. We're going to give you the best interest rate. And then the black guy goes in. He's like, hey, I'm a GI too, and I want to buy this house. And they're like, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
We can't give you a loan because that house is in a white neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
So then what happens is, and correct me if I'm wrong, so what happens is then there's all these horrible white people working with the government who is managing segregation, whether
Mm-hmm.
you want to believe it or not,
Mm-hmm.
it's a fact. And they go to these white neighborhoods and they knock on the door and they like, hello, Mrs. Johnson. Listen, the black people want to move into this neighborhood and it's gonna ruin the neighborhood. You might want to leave now.
That's
Sell
exactly.
us your house. So then the white person, this white realtor, horrible human being, buys the house, goes to the person of color and says, hey, I'm going to give you a loan for this house. But the loan interest rate is so fucking high and the rules are so horrible that you miss one payment or one thing happens, you lose the house. Then this white guy sells the house, now takes it back, sells it to another person of color, and continues that whole process. So what happens? You don't have that opportunity to have your family, like you said, with the pot or whatever, like, there's no, like, hey, I'm going to leave this equity in this house to my children.
Mm-hmm.
So Craig, aren't getting any, you know, equity from the house that so-and-so or whatever owned because they made it impossible.
Yeah.
And is that a good explanation?
It is. I mean, that's a very basic explanation for anybody who refuses or, you know, tries to pretend that they don't understand. For sure.
Well, I've been called a basic bitch, so
no.
If I give a basic answer, that's all I can do, Mr. Stewart.
No, I didn't mean it in that way.
I know. I'm just kidding.
But you know, there's actually a television show on Apple TV that speaks to what you're talking about. It's with Samuel Jackson and Anthony Mackie. It's called The Banker. Excellent movie. And I spoke about it on my live, like just telling people that's a great show to watch. And like I said, it's on Apple TV. And it basically talks about how they were both they were black investors, and how they had to hire a white guy who would go in and be the face so that they could buy these buildings. He didn't have the money. They had to teach him everything in terms of the law and how real estate works. And then of course they funded it. But he had to be the face and this is based on a true story, because they wouldn't allow, this was in the 60s. And they wouldn't allow black people to buy. They were basically buying banks, is what they were buying. But yeah.
Wow, and it's called The Banker?
It's called The Bankers.
I don't have that. I'm one of those weird people that doesn't have an iPhone.
Oh, okay.
I bet you, I need to try to find that, because I'm so interested in how all that played out, because I think that's so impactful for where black people are today. And when I hear white people say we haven't held black people down, I'm like, I'm gonna need you to rethink what you're saying.
And then even
it's just a fact. It's a fact. Don't deny it.
And as I talk about in the dedication of Book of Jewels, I talk about how at one point I used to be ashamed of the alcoholism rate or the incarceration rate in the black community. But when you think about the domino effect of all of this stuff that we just talked about, it really can crush a people, a community of people. And that's part of the reason why the alcohol rate or the drug abuse rate is what it is in the black community, because after a while, you get knocked down so many times, and you know what I mean?
Yes. It's just continuously happening.
It's cyclical.
And you have the lazy people, lazy white people who are just, they don't want to know because maybe they think, oh, this has nothing to do with me because I'm not black. But it does have something to do with you because you're a human being, for Christ's sake. Excuse my language. But speaking of your book, Book of Jewels, which I think is fantastic.
Thank you.
I want to talk. I already. You said that you wrote it for black people, and I'll explain to you how. And I find that to be fantastic, and I love that you're so honest in this book. You're very, very honest. And when I was reading it, I could tell that I was like, his target audience are black people. I got that. Right? What I felt like I was in a big lecture hall, and you were telling stories to people, and I was lucky enough to be in the room.
Wow.
I was lucky enough to be invited in and said, hey, you don't look like an asshole. Come in.
Right.
Let me, I'm going to share stories that my people or black people are going to resonate with. You're not black. You might not resonate with them, but if you're a decent human being, you're going to connect. So I have so many notes to talk to you about this book because so many things in this book resonated with me. And one of them was, like I said, when you recommended seeing the movie 13th, which is, for people who don't know, 13th abolished slavery. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. I promise you people don't know that. And, but I'm sorry, I just call it the way it is.
Yeah.
I bet you if you walked out on the street, if I went across the street and asked my neighbor, do you know what the 13th Amendment was? Do you know what the 19th? No, they don't know. All these Americans who think they're patriots and they don't even know this shit.
Right.
It drives me absolutely crazy.
Right.
But in this movie that I watched, they talk about the movie The Birth of a Nation, which was a huge fucking racist dumpster fire movie. And there's this scene where it's so disturbing. I'm not gonna lie, when I cried when I watched this movie. But and I'll tell you at the point when. But there's this point in the movie where this white woman, she jumps off a cliff because she just thinks that some black man's gonna rape her. Like, not going to. He's probably not gonna. He's probably just walking by. But they set it up where she literally kills herself. And in the movie, they're like, she'd rather die than be raped. And he's not even gonna rape her. He's just walking by. And so it started making me think of how white people are always believed over black people. And then I started thinking of Emmett Till, which is the part of the movie when I cried. And for people who don't know who Emmett Till is, he was a 14-year-old boy. He lived up north. He was down in the south visiting his family. He went into a store. Some white woman apparently said that he flirted with her. Later on, decades later, she said, I fabricated the story. And he was basically beaten to where he wasn't even recognized.
And his mom demanded that the casket be opened because she wanted to see how they had killed him.
Exactly. It's almost kind of like if it was today, people would be filming it on a phone, right? You're going to see this because you need to see what is happening to a 14-year-old boy. But like I said, so it started making me think, like, they immediately believed this woman over this kid, right? Just without even any judgment. And so then I started thinking, why are black people guilty before they're innocent? That was one of my thoughts, right? Because it's supposed to be you're innocent before you're guilty. But in history, and even last Monday, when that dude killed George, guilty before innocent. And then I started thinking about Amy Cooper.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm getting a little emotional. I'm sorry. So, I get angry. I should have warned you about that. So, and, Chris Cooper, the guy who's just like, hey,
Yeah.
did you put your dog on a leash? Because I'm trying to look at.
He was bird watching.
And
Yeah.
Bird watching. And what makes me think Amy Cooper is the devil is that when she's talking to him, she's all angry and she's yelling at him. And then when she gets on the phone with 911, she changes her tone. Now she's afraid. Now she's scared for her life from a bird watcher. Okay.
Well, because
she forgave her. She apologized because she got. But my point of this story was she was being filmed, and she did not even care. That is how privileged this woman was. She was so privileged in her whiteness that she was being filmed acting out like this, didn't even give a fuck. Still believed when she got on the phone with 911, the cops were going to come and arrest this man. And we know what happens when white people call the cops on innocent black people.
She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew exactly.
But he forgave her. He's forgiven her. He's gone out and said, I forgive her. Now, my question to you is,
I think sometimes.
Yes,
I think I already know what you're going to ask me. I think sometimes black folks.
What am I going to ask you?
I think sometimes black folks are too forgiving, and I think
that was the question.
Yeah, and I think there's I think there's a pathology though. I think that reaches all the way back to slavery, and I know a lot of times people don't think that that there's still a connection, and but I do think that there's still a connection there because. Even when sometimes when there was a time I used to take public transportation, like in high school and that kind of thing, you're taking the bus or the train. And I would sometimes even now, like you're in a grocery store and you see a parent, a black parent, really, really lecturing that child, cursing the child, get your dumb ass up, get your black ass up, or whatever it is that they're saying. That reaches back to slavery because black parents were so afraid that if their child made a mistake or fucked up in some kind of way or just was, God forbid, just being a child in front of their master, the result of that could be them being whipped. It could be the result of them dying or being sold off to another plantation. And so black folks, black slaves at that time would say, oh, master, he's just a dumb nigga. Get on up, nigga. That's how they would talk to their children because they were just trying to excuse the behavior. And we see a different incarnation of that. It's the same thing. When you see a black parent, get your little dumb ass up, or whatever it is they're saying, like that public humiliation like that, there's a connection to that. But the point, to continue the point that you were making, I think that sometimes black folks are so ingratiating. And there's this desire for some to be finally seen as human by white people. Like I said earlier, I've been places and I've seen black people go out of their way to be extra nice and extra kind to white people. I was on the plane. I was on an airplane. I was on the plane train, like inside the airport where it takes you from one concourse to the next. And I remember being on the train, and it was we were standing up, standing room only. There were no seats. And I remember standing to the back window, to the back door, and there was a black girl that was on the train. She was standing in front of me. And then at the next stop, a group, maybe 2 or 3 white people may have gotten on. I don't remember, but there was an older white guy that bumped her bag. She had a bag over her shoulder, and he bumped her bag, and she turned around, and he said, "Oh, I'm sorry." And she was so over the top, ingratiating. "Oh no, it's fine, it's okay." And she smiled, and she was just, she just seemed so out of her body to me. And I don't know this girl, but it just seemed so provoked, and it just seemed so calculated. And she was, "Oh no, it's okay, it's fine," this extra laugh. And I just felt in that moment, if that was me and I had bumped her bag, she probably would have given me she probably would have nodded and turned back and looked the other way, and that would have been it. But because it was a white man or a white person, because I don't think it was just because he was a man, I think because it was a white person, she felt the need to be extra congenial, to be, you know what I mean? It's almost like, oh no, it's okay, you know. And I think that sometimes black folks go out of their way to be resolute, to be kind, to be seen as, oh, that was a pleasant black girl. She's not an angry black woman at all. Like, go out of our way, not our, because I don't do it, but I think there are black people that go. Right, right. I think there are black people that go out of their way to defy the stereotype that they think white people may have. Again, concerned with the white gaze.
Back to the white gaze, because you're just, here you are, you're your own person, and as a black woman or a black man, so many of them, I feel like they still need to get that
validation
from master.
Yeah.
Validation from the master.
Yeah.
Even though they haven't lived during slavery, it's almost like it's engraved in black DNA, and you have to fight it. You have to say, no, I don't need to get their approval.
It's a pathology. It's a pathology, and it travels generationally. And to your point, you had said something earlier, and I meant to touch on it. Like you said, right now, because of the climate of what's happening now in the country, you feel the need to be extra nice to people of color or black people. It is kind of the same thing. It is kind of the same thing. Because would you otherwise do it?
Well, yes, I'm always nice to people.
Oh, you're always...
Well, I'm a bitch a lot of the time, but not because of some... I try to look at people, like, if you're an asshole, it doesn't matter if you're black or white, you're an asshole.
Right.
I was in Vegas once with two white friends. We were walking down the street, and this black guy walked up, and he asked for money. We were like, no, we don't have any money. We lost it already. And for some reason, he started hounding my friend. And I was like, yo, back off. Leave us alone. And he goes, oh, what, you scared of a black man? I said, no, I just don't like assholes. And he looked at me, and it was like this moment of we made eye contact. I was like, no, I don't give a fuck. I don't like assholes, so move on.
Right.
And I would have said that to a white person.
Right.
And the way he looked at me, it was almost like he got it. Like we got each other at that moment.
Yeah.
It was weird. It was so weird.
And see, and that's what I was saying to you earlier. I think sometimes we, black people, because we see racism so much and in so many forms, that it's hard to differentiate when it's racism and when it's just actually, this is how the fuck I'm going to respond. Like, I was just saying to a friend, we were watching Little Fires Everywhere with Reese Witherspoon and Halle Berry.
So good.
Reese Witherspoon and Kerry Washington.
You said Halle,
I said Halle Berry.
You are a bad gay black man.
Yes, I meant to say Kerry Washington. I saw her face in my mind, but I don't know why I said Halle Berry. But you remember the scene? Okay, so remember the scene where the I can't remember the oldest daughter's name, but she was dating the black boy. And remember they were at the drive-thru, and it was a black girl who was at the drive-thru, and she handed her the food, and the white girl said, "Oh, that's not what I ordered." Da 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 da. And then when she sent it back, the white girl said to her boyfriend, her black boyfriend, she said to him, "See, this is why they work in fast food," or something to that effect. This is why they don't go to college and they work in fast food. Now, my thing is, and this is what I said to my friend, because the boyfriend, who, like I said, is black, got upset about it. But she may have very well had said that if the girl... Oh, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. You kind of broke up there, but now you're back.
Okay. So when the white girl said, "See, this is why they always work in fast food," or this is why this is why she's working, they work in fast food. And from the black boy's perspective, he interpreted it as racist because he felt like she was saying it because it was a black girl, and she said they. This is why they. But she may not have meant that from a racial perspective. It could have been they, meaning people who work in fast food. But because issues are so sensitive, it's sometimes very hard to separate the racism from, no, this was just a situation where, because if the girl who was at the drive-thru was a white girl, she very well may have said the same thing, and the black boy would have never said anything about it.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Well, when you've lived decades and centuries That
Right.
makes sense to me.
Right.
You know, if I said something and if I said something to you and you were like, "What the hell did that mean?" I would clarify. I wouldn't be like, "Oh God, you know what's wrong with Greg?" I would be like, "All right, remember where he's coming from. He's coming from a different place than you." And I think that's what happened. You know, people just don't like anything that's different.
Right. Because because we are the sum of our experiences. We're the sum of our experiences. The total sum.
Well, what do you think? Okay, so let's go to. Are you there?
I'm here.
Okay. Let's go to the protests. I want to talk, like, so with the protests going on right now, the protests and the riots and all that such, it almost seems different than before. You know, almost 30 years ago was the Rodney King thing. Here we are in 2020, same fucking situations happening. We don't learn. Nobody learns. But it almost seems different. Does it seem different to you this time? Like people are and I hate to say people are really fed up, but I almost think that this is it. This is the change that's coming. This is it. This has to happen.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it feels different. To me, it feels the same. What I think is disappointing is that, like you said, 30 years ago, here we are 30 years later, and it's the same. And now, I'm not a person that thinks that racism will be cured. I don't think that will ever happen. And what I think is important to note is every country or every country has their thing that they discriminate for, right? In this country, it's skin color. But in certain Asian countries, they discriminate based on the eye fold, your eyelids. You understand what I'm saying? Because some, depending on whether you're talking about Chinese people or Japanese people or Filipino, their eye folds are different. You know, and just, you know, since we're talking about race and all of that kind of stuff, you know, often as kids, we say Asian people or Chinese in particular is what we usually say. Chinese people have these slanted eyes. Well, they don't have slanted eyes. Their eyes aren't slanted. They just have a larger eye fold. And so it covers more of their eyeball. And so it looks like, but they discriminate based on that. So every group has their thing. So I don't think that racism will be cured in the United States, but I just would have imagined that we would be so much further along, especially right after having a black president. You know, I just felt like we were moving in a more progressive direction. But I was listening to the Breakfast Club yesterday. It's the #1 urban syndicated radio station in the country. They're out of New York. And Rush Limbaugh was on the show, which is completely unheard of because they are the complete antithesis of what he is. And he was just outraged by this whole George Floyd thing and murder. And he wanted to be on the show and really talk about, you know, ways of, you know, bridging the gap and how to, you know, dismantle all of this racism, this systemic racism. But he, again, I applaud his efforts, but he was completely oblivious to his privilege, to white privilege. He just basically said he feels like that's something that the Democrats have conjured up, white privilege. And I mean, it was very telling. But it made me think that there are white people that are they're just unaware. And again, I think that it's lazy, intellectually lazy, but there are white people who just don't know. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know. So I don't think that it's different, like what we're seeing now versus what we saw with Rodney King. I just think that, again, you know, these cell phones and social media coupled together have become the best surveillance, you know, and to make everybody aware. Like, this stuff has been going on. It's just that we get the information in real time now, and it spreads across the country and around the world within minutes.
Which I think, you know, I'm so against. I'm not a big fan of social media. I use social media because I have to, for the podcast and for the stuff. But this is one of those times where I'm like, I'm glad we have camera in their pocket. I'm glad that, maybe there's somebody in a certain part of the country who's so oblivious to what's happening with racial disparity in our country, sees something and thinks, holy shit, that's happening? We need to stop that. I hope that, like I still have some hope for that. I mean, that's what I'm doing this podcast for, is to have these conversations, to get people to hear different outlooks, or talk, like a black guy and a white guy can talk about white privilege and no one's upset. Like you say to me, like, Joe, you could say to me, Joe, we know your white privilege, and I would be like, yeah, like I'm not offended. And I personally know white people who, when I start talking about white privilege, they act like I'm attacking them as a person.
Right.
Like, this is way bigger than, bitch. This is way fucking bigger than you. Settle down.
Right.
You ain't that important. This is something that is so much bigger, that's been going on so much longer than you're like 26 years on a planet. So relax.
Right. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and I think a part of the denial is a fear of, if I acknowledge this, then some way, somehow, I'll have to give up some of my privilege. And what I'm very clear about is we all have privilege. And I write about it in Book of Jewels. Like, we all have privilege. Trans women who can pass, who can move through the world without anybody knowing that they were not born female, they have privilege over those who cannot pass.
Right.
We
you
have,
did talk about that.
yeah, you have gay men who can pass as straight. So they have privileges.
Thank you.
You know what I mean? So every community, you have privilege. There are privileges. So we all have to acknowledge our privilege and use our privilege in whatever way we can to move someone else forward. Because for me, success is not about how much money you amass, but living your life in such a way that someone else breathes easier because you lived.
Absolutely. You just mentioned, like, if white people have to admit white privileges exist, then they're afraid that they would have to lose some of their privileges, but that's not true.
Right.
It reminds me, one doesn't equal the other. You know what I mean? It reminds me of when same-sex marriage or marriage for everyone was on the table, and there were straight people like, this is going to ruin my marriage. How the fuck is this going to affect you?
Meanwhile, the divorce rate was already over 50%. So like.
Meanwhile, you're fucking tweeting that gay marriage is bad, but you're watching a TV show that says married in 65 seconds. Like, settle down. Like, you're such a hypocrite. I can't even take you serious.
Right. For sure.
That really, I remember when that was happening, because they would be like, I'm like, there's TV shows out there. Our president's been married like 3 times. Don't talk to me about I'm going to ruin your marriage. I've been with my husband for 16 years. You need to take a seat before you fall into eternity.
Oh, wow. 16 years. Congratulations.
Well, congratulate him, because I'm the one who's I'm the one who's difficult. He's easy. I'm a filmmaker. But I want to go back to the book for a minute. So in chapter 4, in the chapter Difficult Conversation, I live for difficult conversations. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
And of course, you talked about, so great. This book is fantastic, ladies and gentlemen. I don't care what color your skin is. Read this book. You will connect to a part of this book. I don't know what part, but you will. And you shared about how you were in a car accident with a friend, and your insurance company wasn't giving you enough money, and you were like, shit, I have to take care of myself. So you sued the insurance company. Now, and then your friend kind of, I think he probably took it personal. Do you think you could have made that decision to put yourself first earlier in life than when it happened?
Oh, wow. I think my life would have gone in a different direction if I put myself first sooner. Because that's really what that the underlying theme of that, and you hit the nail on the head, is putting yourself first. Because if you have car insurance, that's what the purpose of car insurance is for. And I was hurt. It wasn't like it was a fender bender and I said, oh, well, I'm going to sue your insurance company. I was hurt. Like, I was bleeding on the scene. You know what I mean? Like, I I had a limp because I had sprained my ankle. Like it was a mess. It was horrible, and that was just that was the quintessential example of putting yourself first, of choosing you first. But if I had done that sooner in life, I think about relationships that I would have probably avoided. But of course, then there would have been lessons that I would have never gotten, or I wouldn't have gotten at that point. I can't say I would have never gotten them, but I wouldn't have gotten them at that point. But even going back to my career, like I was saying earlier, I was afraid of being in the front, or in the forefront of people seeing me and knowing who I was. Like I never wanted that. But I think I held myself back until I finally let that go and moved forward. But even prior to that, I remember being nervous of being the first person in my family to be successful, because I felt like the burden would be on me. Everybody would be relying on me. Everybody would be calling me, and I just didn't want that responsibility. And so I think in subconscious ways, I don't think I was very conscious of it, but in subconscious ways, I think that I kind of stalled my own success, if that makes sense. But if I had known then what I know now about choosing myself first, I would have never allowed that to deter me or to slow me down.
That actually makes sense, because everything happens when it's supposed to happen. But when I read that part of the book, I thought, I wonder. First of all, I wonder how old. I had three questions. I wondered how old you were at the time. I wondered if your friend was black, also, because at one point I thought, I wonder if his friend thinks, "Yo, why are you doing that? We're brothers. Why are you doing this to me?" I thought of that, and then I thought, I wonder if he would have done something differently if he was younger and hadn't lived long enough to realize, hey, you know what? Yeah, that's why you have insurance, and I'm injured, and unfortunately I have to take care of myself.
Right. I was 42, and yes, he is black.
Okay. Was there? Do you think it had to do with him thinking you were going, like, trying to bring him down, or did he take it personal?
I would only be speculating because
Okay.
I tried reaching out to him several times after that, and he just basically pulled back slowly but surely. And then I reached out again like months after that, and he responded, was like, "Yeah, I've been thinking about you a lot too. I really would like to sit down and talk." I don't know if it's so. This is where I speculate. So I don't know if it was he felt like I was trying to take him down as much as if he was embarrassed. I kind of thought maybe he was embarrassed, because when we got into the car accident, he was very teary-eyed, and he was just like, "I'm just so glad you're okay," and he was just like really, like near tears. And then even that day, later that evening, and the next day, he texted and was like, I just thank God that you're okay. I'm just so grateful, and just whatever. But so I don't know. I don't know if he was just embarrassed, or or maybe he was partly angry.
Maybe he was embarrassed.
Yeah, or if he was partly angry because I did end up suing the car insurance. And again, the reason that I sued the insurance is because they had only offered me $1,500, and they had offered for pain and suffering, and then they offered $5,000 for any medical. But they offered that the same day that the accident happened. Like I had only been to the emergency room. I hadn't started going to the chiropractor. I hadn't gotten any of the MRIs or any of that stuff. And I'm glad I didn't settle, because the medical stuff ended up being, I think, about $10,000 to $13,000. I can't even remember. So who would have filled in that gap?
Right. No, I'm completely on board with your decision. I would have did the same thing. In that same chapter, you talked about the Kevin Hart tweet.
I was hoping you'd bring that up.
You were? I'm going to read to you something that I highlighted. This is from chapter 4, Difficult Conversations again. Obviously, our society was a different place then. We're talking about the homophobic tweet that Kevin Hart wrote about 10 years ago regarding his son. Obviously, our society was a different place then, and we weren't as inclusive as LGBTQ people because there was no kerfuffle. So instead of addressing that truth, we focused on punishing punishing and persecuting hard for something that many people believed about gay people at the time in our society. I thought that was such a smart thing to write. And it also made me think, why are we so uncomfortable not addressing real issues in America? We want to, instead of saying, yeah, think about that. 10 years ago, it was okay to bash gay people on Twitter. Instead of saying, oh, he wrote that 10 years ago, well, I think differently now, so now I'm going to try to ruin his career, which I don't know if you know this, I'm very against the people who try, what is the term?
Cancel culture.
Cancel. Yeah, we love to not forgive,
Yeah.
So, I just thought that was so smart, but what do you think why do you think we as a society just don't want to face the true issues that are going on, and we try to mask it with other shit?
Well, I mean, I think we like to think in an esoteric kind of way, like we're always constantly growing and evolving, and that's great in theory. But the reality is, not everyone grows at the same pace. Not everybody grows at the same rate. And so, while, that tweet was 10 years ago. And I understand the pain that it probably sent into the universe, because I see it as a vibration. Like whatever energy you put out, whether it's through your social media or through your work, you're sending a vibration, and I think about the parents, black parents in particular, that are fans of Kevin Hart, who may have seen that tweet back in the day, who may have retweeted it, who may have posted it on their social media, or who may have cemented their views about gay people because of what he said in that tweet, who may have abandoned their own child that happens to be gay because of his tweet and because of what he said about gay people. So I understand the impact and the damage that he could have done, but I also understand that was 10 years ago. And perhaps he's grown. Perhaps he's evolved. He apologized. He did. He did. And he apologized recently when it resurfaced. He apologized again. And I just think that we have to leave room for people to be flawed, and we have to leave room for people to grow and evolve. Because I'm sure that there are things that I've probably tweeted and said back in the day that, that could resurface. And here's a really good example that I know for sure. That's personal to me. I don't know about any tweet or anything like that, because I don't think I would have tweeted anything like this. But I remember I wasn't, and probably 10 years ago, probably 5 years ago, I wasn't comfortable. I wasn't comfortable with trans people. And right now, I work with one of the most famous trans women in the world. But you couldn't have told me 5 years ago that not only will we be working together, but we've developed a friendship. Like, we talk on the phone, like, what I'm saying? We'll go out to eat. You know what I'm saying? But what I am clear about is the issues that I had with trans people. And when I think about the issues, I always think specifically about trans women. We often leave trans men out of the conversation. And it's interesting because I'm doing a panel conversation with trans men and women tomorrow. It's going to be tomorrow, and I don't know when this podcast is going to air, but it's going to be on my YouTube channel. And because again, I'm all about bridging communities, but I'm clear that my issues or my discomfort with trans people had very little to do with them. It had more to do with me and where I was in my comfort level in my sexuality. And I knew that if I was in too close contact with a trans woman, that would have been too gay for the kind of guy that I was attracted to at that time in my life. Does that make sense?
Let me clarify something. Yeah, so let me clarify. So what you're saying is, like, you were kind of nervous, like, hey, if I associate myself with trans women, guys that I'm into might see that and think I'm so gay that they wouldn't want to be with me. Is that?
Yes, and the guys that I was interested in were so closeted that they couldn't be associated with anybody that out. Because it wasn't limited to just trans women. It was flamboyant gay boys too. I couldn't be that closely associated with any of that. So what I'm clear about is my views have changed on that. So isn't Kevin Hart entitled to change his views? Yeah, maybe he tweeted that 9, 10 years ago, and maybe he believed that then. But he could have evolved since then. He could have changed. He could have grown. And I think we have to leave room for people to grow.
And I think that's so true. And thank you for being so honest about that. See, like I said at the beginning, I actually wrote in my notes, what did I write? Where did I write it? Your new book is all truth. I wanted to make sure that I said that. And then you come on the show, and you're just so easily, I can connect to you so well, because I've had those moments too. And I've had moments where I probably said something that I would be like, shit. We all have said something or tweeted something or done something. But the fact that he apologized was great. But I just didn't, and I understand the fact that, his tweet could have caused, maybe somebody has a gay son and now they're like, oh shit, you need to get out of the house.
Absolutely. Or could have pushed some gay person to go and commit suicide or get on drugs or, whatever. I understand the damage that it could have caused.
I think his tweet is, please correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't want to look it up right now, but I believe it had something to do with, like, if his son was gay, he'd smash a dollhouse.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it was something. It's something like he would kick his ass or something like that.
Right, and it was like, if I read that, I would be like, oh, this is a comedian trying to be outrageous, and a lot of people aren't like that. A lot of people don't look at comedians and say, oh, they're just trying to be outrageous.
And that's the other thing too.
The next level.
And that's the other thing. It was 10 years ago, so he wasn't the star that he wasn't the wealthy star that he is now. So he was on that upward climb. And then to your point, you may be rational enough to say, oh, well, he's a comedian, he's just trying to be outrageous. But what about the 14-year-old boy that's not going to think about all of those different angles?
That's true.
So, I mean, I understand the sense of responsibility, because even now, as my social media platform has grown, oftentimes people will misinterpret something that I have said or something that I have posted. And there are times that I will go in and clarify, but then there are times that I don't, because I can't try to, because even the same is true even with the book. Like, I can be as clear as I possibly can, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to be misinterpreted. You know what I mean? So it's hard to try to go out and try to, make sure and put out all of these fires that may have started inadvertently. You know what I mean? So, like, for example, like I posted something on my social media yesterday, and in fact, I posted two things. And the first thing that I posted was, hey, black men, both gay and straight, who date white folks as a preference, make sure Blake and Karen pack you a lunch on your way to protest with the rest of us thugs. And then I posted this one that said,
oh, I think I know which one you're going to say, and I think I commented on it, but go ahead.
Don't open your mouth for black dick and keep it closed on black issues. And there were black gay men who probably date white men who got up under my comments and were like, oh, this is so racist, and you're saying that. And then there was a white guy that was on my live last night who said, are you going to address the fact that you said that black people should date black people and white people should date white people? I never said that. That's not even what these things say. These things are simply saying, for the black men, straight and gay, who only date white people, and you say you have a preference, make sure that they are in support of what's going on in the world right now. That's what it's saying. Right. It has nothing to do with whether or not you should date them or not. And so there's always room for people. The larger your platform grows, there's always more room for people to misconstrue. And so that's been a fear.
Because they're looking to point their finger at you.
Yes.
Aha, I got you, Craig. I got you.
Yes. I've been called racist before. I've been called transphobic, like in recent times. And I'm like, wait, well, I'm transphobic? Like, what did I do? You know what I'm saying? And I have a lot of white followers that actively join my live and be in the conversation, that support everything that I do. The books, the coffee mugs, the t-shirts, like the greeting cards, they support everything. But I think that they get what I'm saying. They're not coming on to my social media looking to misinterpret, looking to misconstrue. I think that there's some people that intentionally try to do that. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. I was called a racist recently on Instagram because Kathy Griffin, the comedian,
I love her.
photo. I love her too, and she posted a photo of this group of people that are. Doing for the but it was this group of it was like 5 or 6 white people that were going to be in charge of something because it's the Trump era, so that's how it works. And I wrote a comment like, "Damn, I hope it doesn't start snowing because I won't see them because they're all so white."
Right.
I wrote something like that. So somebody I don't even know, and I just wrote it and then went on with my day, right? Because it's so non-diverse that you can't not ignore it when it's like
right.
Four white men over 80, and then Ivana Trump or whatever the fuck her name.
Right.
So I wrote that, and I went on my day, and then all of a sudden I look on Instagram, I got this tweet, I got this comment, and I look, and it's on that post, and it's this guy saying, "I just went through your Instagram page, and you haven't had a black person on your." He said something like, "Oh, how white of you to not even have black people on your Instagram page." I looked all the way back to 2016.
Oh,
and
God.
My Instagram page is the Flight Attendant Joe page. It's not
Right.
my personal page.
Right.
But here was the funniest part was the day he wrote that was the day my podcast episode came out with
Keisha.
And it was
With Keisha.
Talk race and racism, and it was the fucking picture that was on my Instagram page.
Right.
I looked at I didn't even respond because you can't talk to me.
Yeah, usually I don't. Like I make it my business to not get down in those comments and argue, and I'd rather use my energy for other stuff.
But I wanted to, right? Oh yeah, but I wanted to be like, "You dumb fuck."
Right.
I was like, "No, you can't do that." Like, he's an idiot.
Right. Every now and then, I'll get down there and I'll, because like for example, we're having this panel discussion tomorrow with the trans community. So we've assembled a panel. It's myself and Derek J. Derek J was on Fashion Queens on Bravo. But and he was on Real Housewives of Atlanta. But we have these panel conversations, and you know what? In fact, I want you to be a part of a panel. I don't know the exact date yet, but it's about bridging the gap between the white gay community and the black gay community. So I think you'd be great for that. But
I will do anything you ask.
And so we're doing this panel tomorrow about the trans community, and I noticed today when I woke up, one of the first things that I saw today was a trans woman, and she was under the flyer, and she says, "I bet they don't have any real trans women on here that take their womanhood seriously. I bet it's a bunch of drags that call themselves trans, a bunch of gay boys that still have their penis, and all they do is talk about their penis and this, that, and the third." I mean, she just went on this rampage. And so I commented to her because I didn't take her comment as an attack. I felt it was negative, but I didn't feel like it was an attack. What I'm saying is I avoid like personal attacks. But I just simply said to her, I said, if your goal was to move the conversation forward, you could have emailed me or Derek J to participate on the panel instead of writing this long comment down here. We want to have a healthy conversation, not a negative one. And this panel isn't just for trans women. We're also opening the conversation up to trans men because we rarely hear their story. The goal of this panel and every panel that we've done and will do in the future is to bridge the gap between communities, not divide or further perpetuate stereotypes. And so then she inboxed me and she said, "I'm sorry." That was all she said. And I just said, "No worry," and I responded to her. But she just responded and said, "I'm sorry." And I said, "It's all good. I understand your concern." So we did our best to put together a panel of intelligent trans men and trans women to move the needle in conversation forward.
Wow. And see, just by being professional, you were able, and she apologized because because there's just some people out there who just assume everything. Maybe she wants to be on the panel. Maybe she's jealous that she's not on the panel. Like there's so many things that could be going. Like the person who called me out on that Kathy Griffin post, it was a white person, private page. So I was like, what I wanted to say was, thank you for calling me out on my business page,